All right, ready for this. We're going deep on Zaynab Bint Jahsh today. You guys wanted the full story, not just the Cliff Notes version, and let me tell you, these sources do not disappoint. We've got pieces from a biography and a lecture, each one kind of giving us a different angle on her life, and let's just say it gets way more interesting than you might think. Piety, charity, even a bit of family drama. So, ready to unpack all this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Let's start with the family because, well, her family tree is anything but ordinary.
Oh, for sure. Right off the bat, you've got nobility mixed with some seriously deep faith.
Hmm.
I mean, she was born into a prominent Meccan family.
Mm.
We're talking wealthy, influential, connected to the Prophet Muhammad himself. Her mom, his paternal aunt.
Whoa, okay. So from the very beginning, we're seeing this this intersection of high social status and the whole Islamic movement just starting to take root. It makes you wonder, what was it like back then navigating those two worlds, especially with everything going on?
You're spot on. And it wasn't just Zainab, her siblings too, right? They were all kind of making waves, each in their own way, deeply involved in those early days of Islam. Take her brother, Abdullah ibn Jahsh. He actually became the first emir of Islam.
Wow, first Emir. Okay, so clearly a strong leader. But wait, the sources mention he's buried in the same grave as Hamza, the prophet's uncle. That can't just be a coincidence, right?
No way. It shows you how close they were, the respect they had for each other. Like even in death, they're together. Hamza, he was a warrior, a protector of the early Muslims. So being buried with him, that says a lot about Abdullah.
Right, right. Courage, leadership, definitely runs in the family. What about the other siblings, though? Did they kind of follow a similar path?
Well, let's look at another brother, Ubaidullah ibn Josh. This is where things get super interesting. He actually embraced monotheism even before the prophet received the revelations.
Whoa, that's pretty forward thinking for the time.
Yeah, talk about being ahead of the curve. And he was one of those early Muslims who fled to Abyssinia, to escape persecution.
Right. So we're seeing this independent streak in the family, this willingness to stand up for what they believe in, even when it's dangerous. It makes you think about how they were raised, what kind of environment fostered that kind of conviction.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then you have Abu Ahmad ibn Josh. He was known for his piety.
Yeah.
But think about this. He was blind. Blind, but still super active in the community, involved in worship, discussions. He was Zainab's guardian, too, showing, a protective side as well.
That's really powerful. Faith being the source of strength, even when faced with adversity, it adds another layer to their family dynamic, right? This mix of unwavering belief and personal struggles.
Sure. And we can't forget their sister, Hamad bin Josh. She was married to Musab ibn Umair, a prominent companion of the Prophet. But tragically, she lost her husband, her brother, and her uncle, all in the Battle of Uhud.
Oh, wow. I mean, the grief, the loss, it's hard to even imagine.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but it really speaks volumes about the sacrifices that early Muslims made for their faith. It wasn't just about beliefs in their heads. It was about life or death choices, playing out in these really personal ways.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder, how did all of this shared experience of faith and sacrifice, how did it shape Zainab,
Yeah.
her outlook, her actions? Because, well, her life was about to take some pretty dramatic turns.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Okay, speaking of those turns, let's talk about her marriages, especially that first one. Sources suggest that, well, she had hopes of maybe marrying the prophet himself.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been out of the ordinary considering her family, her piety, all of that. But the prophet, known for his wisdom, right?
Yeah.
He actually proposed she marry Zayd ibn Haritha, his freed slave.
Now that's a bold move, revolutionary even. Think about Mecca back then, marrying a freed slave. I mean, for someone of Zainab's status, it would have been unthinkable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about personal happiness. This was a direct challenge to the whole class system. A statement that lineage didn't matter, not in the eyes of Allah.
I bet that sent shockwaves through the community. Did Zainab and her family just accept this?
Well, both the bio and the lecture talk about some initial resistance, which makes sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're human. They've got these social pressures, expectations.
Right, of course.
But then you have this Quranic verse that's revealed, and it specifically addresses this situation, emphasizing acceptance of Allah's will, even when it clashes with what we want.
So they end up going through with the marriage, demonstrating their obedience, right, to Allah and his messenger. But did this groundbreaking union actually work out?
Sadly, it didn't. Both sources say it was pretty short-lived, less than a year actually. And it's a reminder that, even with the best intentions, things just don't always work out. It also raises these questions about arranged marriages, even within a deeply spiritual context.
It really makes you think about those expectations, the societal pressures, and the sacrifices they were making, all for their faith, for this greater good. But, hold on, because the story doesn't end there, does it? The sources kind of hint at an even more controversial turn of events.
You got it. This is where it gets really interesting and also where a lot of the misconceptions start popping up. So after the divorce, Allah commands the prophet to marry Zaynab himself.
Wow, okay, that's a twist I did not see coming. I can only imagine the rumors, the judgment. I mean, he was the prophet, right? This wasn't just any marriage.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. Both sources highlight that. This union was officiated by divine decree. The Quran itself was the witness.
That's a powerful statement, right? It
Yeah.
emphasizes just how sacred this union was and its significance beyond any, societal norms.
Right. But we can't just, ignore the controversy surrounding this. It's important to acknowledge those misinterpretations, the biases, especially looking back from a modern perspective. Absolutely. And well, we won't get into every detail here. There are scholarly resources out there that tackle these claims head on. They provide that historical context, you know, debunking those misconceptions.
That's good to know. And we'll definitely link those resources for anyone who wants to like really dig into it. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and focus back on Zainab herself. Beyond these headline-grabbing marriages, what kind of woman was she?
Well, for that, we can turn to Aisha, another wife of the Prophet. And surprisingly, she's a key source of insight into Zainab's character. Kind of fascinating, right? Learning about one wife through the lens of another.
Yeah, it is, especially considering, the dynamics that could exist between wives in such a unique situation. So, what does Aisha tell us? What does she reveal about Zainab?
Well, she actually praises her quite a bit,
Hmm.
and it's not just empty flattery. Aisha commends her piety, her truthfulness, her generosity, and her strong commitment to family.
Okay, that's interesting. It suggests a certain level of like respect there, maybe even affection, which you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Yeah. And it goes even deeper than that. During a tough time, this incident where Aisha faced false accusations, Zainab was her biggest defender. Think about that. The courage it took to stand up for the truth, even when it might have been easier to, just stay quiet.
That speaks volumes about her integrity, choosing what's right over what's easy. That's a lesson for any time period.
For sure. Now, here's something that might seem small, but it gives us another glimpse into Zainab. She wasn't always known as Zainab. Her original name was Bara, which means pure.
Oh, okay. That's intriguing. Why the change?
The prophet himself changed it. He was sensitive to how it might be interpreted, realizing that even names could be, like, misconstrued. So he chose something more fitting, a name that didn't
Oh.
imply some kind of inherent purity that separated her from everyone else.
That's fascinating. It shows you his awareness of language, how words are perceived, especially in a, religious context. But it also speaks to Zainab's humility, right? Accepting this name change that could have been seen as, diminishing her status.
It's subtle, but it hints at a willingness to let go of those worldly titles for something deeper, more meaningful.
Hmm.
And this is really just the beginning. Her life after marrying the prophet, that's when her dedication to worship, to charity, it really blossoms.
This is where that rope comes in, right? The sources mention a rope in the mosque. Tell me more. I'm intrigued.
So Zainab was known for her long, like really long nighttime prayers, hours of devotion. To support herself during these long periods, she'd use this rope tied between two pillars. I mean, it shows her tenacity, her unwavering commitment.
Yeah, but there's a twist here, right? The prophet actually advised her to moderate her practice, to pray within her capacity. That's a powerful message.
Well, absolutely. It reminds us that even in acts of worship, balance is key. Even the prophet, who exemplified piety, he recognized the importance of taking care of yourself physically, mentally.
A lesson that's still so relevant today. Pushing ourselves is great, but not to the point of, burning out. And speaking of balance, the sources also talk about Zainab's incredible generosity.
Yeah, her charity was legendary. The way they describe it is so vivid. It's like money was burning hot coals in her hands. She couldn't hold on to it. She was so eager to give. It wasn't just about fulfilling some obligation. It was about this deep need to help alleviate suffering.
That's some powerful imagery. What do you think motivated that desire to give? Was it her faith, her experiences, or a mix of both?
It's a great question. And her actions give us some clues. There's this story about Uthman ibn Affan, a very wealthy companion, giving Zaynab money for her personal needs. And she just gives it all away, all of it. It wasn't about accumulating wealth or, even her own comfort. It was about something much bigger.
Almost like she saw wealth as a burden, something to get rid of as quickly as possible. It really challenges our modern ideas about success, where it's all about getting more, more, more.
Completely. It makes you think about our own priorities,
Uh-huh.
right? Our relationship with material things. And remember, this is all happening while the Muslim community is still young, facing persecution, trying to establish itself.
So her generosity wasn't just individual acts of kindness. It was about supporting the community, strengthening it in a really tangible way.
Exactly. And it's that connection between personal faith and communal responsibility that makes Zainab's story so compelling. How one person's actions can ripple outward, impacting not just one life, but a whole society.
And her story doesn't end with her life, does it?
Yeah.
There's this whole other chapter to explore about her legacy, the impact she had, even after she was gone.
Oh yeah, we're just getting started. Zainab's journey. It's a powerful testament to the power of faith to transform lives, to challenge those norms, and to leave a mark on history. And trust me, there are more surprises to come. It's
Yeah.
interesting, we often miss those like practical parts of lives lived so long ago. We get caught up in the big stories, right?
Oh.
But sometimes it's the everyday stuff that really shows you a person's character.
Okay, I like where this is going. What everyday details are we missing with Zaina?
Well, see, Zainab wasn't just praying and giving to charity. She was a working woman too, actively involved in the economy of Medina.
Wait, really? I gotta admit, that's not what I pictured. It makes you rethink those assumptions about women's roles back then, huh? So what kind of work did she do?
The sources say she was skilled in leather work,
Oh.
creating and selling stuff. It's a detail you don't hear often, but it adds this whole other dimension to her. Practical, resourceful, clearly not afraid to roll up her sleeves and get things done.
And get this, the sources also say she donated all her earnings, like all of it, to charity. It wasn't just giving from what she already had. She was out there generating income specifically to help others.
Exactly. That level of dedication, it's beyond just being pious. It's about taking action, using her talents to make a real difference.
It challenges that whole idea of, early Muslims just focusing on the afterlife, ignoring worldly matters. Zainab's story shows this integration of spiritual devotion and actually being engaged in the world.
You got it. And it's not just her. Looking at the bigger picture, lots of early Muslims were involved in trade, agriculture, crafts.
Yeah.
They understood the importance of building a strong community, contributing.
It makes you think about, that balance we're all trying to find, right? How do we connect our spiritual side with our worldly responsibilities? Zainab seemed to have found it, even in those times of like huge upheaval.
That's a key takeaway for sure. It's not an either or thing. We can be ambitious, successful, and still deeply connected to our faith. It's about aligning our actions and our intentions, using what we have to serve a greater purpose.
It's such a powerful message for anyone listening, no matter their background. It's about finding that sweet spot where your passions and your values meet, where you can actually make a difference.
And speaking of making a difference, we've talked about Zainab's generosity, but there's this one story that really sums up her spirit. Remember the prophet telling his wives that the one with the longest arm would be the first to join him in the hereafter?
Oh, yeah. The sources mention how the wives were all confused at first, like comparing their actual arms. It wasn't until Zainab passed away that they understood what he meant.
And it's such a beautiful realization, right? The longest arm wasn't literal. It was a metaphor for her incredible generosity. Her actions, they reach so many people.
Such a powerful image. Her impact, it was bigger than anyone could have imagined. And it wasn't about status or possessions, it was about the legacy she built through those selfless acts.
And that legacy, it still inspires people today. The nickname Mother of the Poor, that says it all.
It's amazing. She went from this life of privilege to becoming a symbol of hope for those who had less. Her story is like this testament to how faith can transform you, how it can break down social barriers, and how you can dedicate yourself to something bigger.
And, even Aisha, who could be competitive, she paid tribute to Zainab after she died.
What did she say? I'm curious to hear that, especially given their dynamic.
Aisha acknowledged her piety, her charity, her support for widows and orphans. She saw her as this righteous woman, beloved by the prophet. It shows a level of respect that goes beyond any rivalry.
It reminds you that even with competition, you can still see the good in someone else. It shows that they both understood how important unity was, recognizing those good qualities even when, I don't know, maybe they were competing for the same affection and attention.
It's really about the power of faith to create bonds that go beyond those personal differences. They might have been rivals in some ways, but they're also sisters in Islam, united by their devotion, their commitment to living by those principles.
Speaking of faith, the sources mention Zainab made some pretty unique preparations for her own death. Not something most people think about, but it gives us a glimpse into how she thought.
Absolutely. She actually had her own coffin made beforehand and said that all her possessions should be given away after she passed.
Wow, that's incredibly thoughtful and humble. It suggests this detachment from worldly things, a focus on what comes after.
And even in death, her modesty was important to her. She wanted to be covered during burial, concerned about her dignity, even then.
That's a beautiful detail. It speaks to her sense of propriety, knowing that even the smallest actions have spiritual significance.
And that concern for modesty, even after death, it's believed to be the reason for this tradition in Medina, where they cover a woman's grave with a sheet during burial.
Really? So her legacy, it extends even to funeral practices. It's amazing how those personal choices can spread outwards, impacting those communal customs.
It reminds you that we never know what impact our actions might have, even the small ones.
And talking about impacts, Zainab's death was clearly a big deal in Medina. The sources describe a huge funeral, which shows how highly regarded she was.
Yeah, it makes sense. Being the first of the prophet's wives to pass away, it must have been a profound loss for everyone.
There's this really touching moment described with her brother, Abu Ahmad. He was heartbroken, obviously, but he found comfort in remembering all the good Zainab had done, all those acts of charity throughout her life.
It shows that the good we do, it keeps on going, even after we're gone. Her legacy wasn't just about grand gestures, it was those everyday acts of kindness that really made a difference for people.
It's a beautiful testament to a life dedicated to others. It makes you ask yourself, what will my legacy be? What will people remember me for?
Now that's a question we should all be asking. Zainab's story reminds us that true greatness isn't about money or fame. It's about using what we have to make the world a better place. It's about cultivating our own long arms of generosity and compassion, reaching out to those in need.
It's amazing how these stories from like centuries ago can still feel so relevant today. Zainab's faith, her generosity, her commitment to what she believed in, it really speaks to you on a human level.
Yeah, doesn't it? And that's the beauty of digging into history, right? It's not just dates and battles. It's about connecting with these people who lived and loved and faced challenges just like we do, and finding inspiration in their stories, seeing how those lessons can apply to us today.
One thing that really stuck with me was Zainab's, her focus on modesty, even in death. The sources mention how she specifically asked to be covered during burial. Might seem like a small thing, but it says a lot about her.
It's a powerful statement,
Mm-hmm.
especially in that cultural context, right? This is a society where like status and appearances were everything.
Yeah.
But Zainab, she chose to focus on her inner values, her connection with Allah, even at the very end.
It's a reminder that true modesty, it comes from within. It's not about fitting in with what society says. It's about your actions matching your beliefs, your values.
And it's pretty cool how this personal request, it actually turned into a wider social practice. The sources say that covering a woman's grave with a sheet during burial, it became a tradition in Medina because of Zainab.
That's incredible. Shows how our individual choices can like spark these communal practices, contributing to this culture of respect and dignity. It makes you think about the ripple effects we can have, even in ways we might not expect.
Totally. Our choices matter. They influence those around us. They shape the world. Zainab's story is a perfect example of that.
It makes me think about the choices we're making now. Are we living in a way that reflects what we believe in? Are we making the world a better, more compassionate place? Are we leaving behind something that honors our beliefs and inspires others?
Those are great questions to think about. And Zainab's life, it gives us a framework for that reflection. Humility over pride, generosity over self-interest, faith over worldly distractions. She was a woman of action. using her skills, her resources to really make a difference.
She really embodies the spirit of Islam, doesn't she? Putting faith into action, serving others, striving for that excellence in every part of life.
Definitely. And that's why her story still resonates with people. Centuries later, she wasn't perfect, nobody is, but her commitment to her faith, her compassion for others, it shines through.
It reminds you that you don't have to be perfect to have an impact. We make mistakes, we learn, and we can still strive to leave the world a little better than we found it.
And who knows, maybe something we do, even if it seems small, it might inspire someone else, create a ripple effect that keeps going, just like Zainab's legacy is still inspiring us today.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Zaynab bint Josh, what would you say is the main message here, the takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's a message of hope, of empowerment. It reminds us that true greatness isn't about social status. It's not about how much stuff you have. It's about your character, your choices, your commitment to living a life that has meaning, that helps others.
A message that goes beyond time and culture, right? It speaks to what it means to be human.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's a message that encourages us to look at our own lives, to find our own long arms of generosity, to strive to make a difference in whatever way we can.
Beautifully put. Well, that concludes our deep dive into the incredible life of Zainab bint Josh. We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we did. Remember, history is full of these amazing people whose stories can teach us, challenge us, and guide us on our own paths. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep seeking that wisdom that's hidden in the stories of the past.